I really appreciate the summary of that, and there was a lot of interesting tidbits and insights in there that the way you tied some of that stuff together was great. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's really an honor for me to hear. I like writing these, and so thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we are recording.
All right. I'll watch my language. So. Okay. Well, I want to say thank you for the opportunity. If you guys don't know it already, Sandy is absolutely phenomenal. Super, super on top of it. Highly, highly organized, very professional. And she has been absolutely a joy to work with, keeping me up to speed on stuff, asking questions, being considerate all the way through. I give a fair amount of presentations to camera clubs. I'd say on average 5 to 6 a week. And Sandy and this club in particular kind of rises to the top of that heap for a wide variety of reasons. You guys are actually somewhat funny. I like the leaf jokes. I might have to write some of those down, but also just in terms of the body of work and the professionalism. So I'm excited to be with you tonight. I was a little touch and go this morning. I got COVID shot number 2 and had some body chills in the night and woke up this morning feeling less than ideal. But about 3:30 this afternoon, my time, it started to, the sun started to come out, so to speak. So hopefully I don't fall asleep or completely get off base, but I think I'm about 95%, which I'm usually probably only 95 to 96 on any given day. So you're not probably going to notice a difference. So I'm going to start the presentation. I'll share my screen and go over to this. And now we should be seeing the presentation, assuming I did everything correctly, which is a big if, and making sure. Did you start the record? I'm just reminding you to start the recording because I always have a note in my notes to start recordings if I'm doing it. So if you've done it, you're good. Okay, great. Well, I appreciate that intro from Sandy. Appreciate that opportunity to be here today. As she mentioned, my name is Nick Stover. I am Nick Stover, the one that she accurately researched and found. I'm based in San Luis Obispo, California. I'm on the Central Coast, in between LA and San Francisco, if you ever find your way out here. And I'm a professional photographer in the standpoint that I teach classes, lead infield workshops, do tutorials, etc. I am not professional in terms of my attitude and how I approach my work, nor do I think at any point in time that I'm any better than anyone else on this creative journey we get to be with together. I'm honored to be here to talk about a topic that it's kind of been hatched up over years of this creative journey that Sandy kind of alluded to. I came up with the psychology of photography in a wide variety of things in a couple different ways. And where I'm going for with the psychology of photography and what we'll spend probably about the next 45 minutes or so on is how do we begin to tie together these 3 things that here in the logo. So the first and foremost thing is the brain. And so too many photographers I encounter and I work with both online and in classes in the field, they don't spend quite as much time thinking about their emotional connection necessarily to a scene or how they can communicate and demonstrate things emotionally. Yes, they'll say, well, I think a lot about my photography, but maybe they're thinking about gear selection. Maybe they're thinking about technical stuff. Maybe they're thinking about what the best food complement is or some other variety of stuff versus the actual way we see and process some of the emotional things we feel in the field. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the vision a little bit. How do we kind of curate, cultivate a little bit of that vision? And then the third variable is the actual landscapes themselves. How do we tie these three things together with ideas and inspiration into what my favorite word is, cohesion. Cohesive. And I'm looking for cohesive flow in a lot of the work we do that has that tying together of all these different parts and pieces versus singular elements. We shouldn't be approaching the landscape from a singular perspective. We shouldn't be all stuck in our head. We shouldn't be all stuck in vision, nor should we be completely just focused on the landscape and not giving some of the things. So tonight we're going to talk about that. And as we start to talk about this, I think one of the first ways to look at the photography a little bit, the photography, how about that? How about just photography in general, is the concept that Freeman Patterson talks about of the camera looking both ways. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking as an interpretation of yourself as much as the actual subject matter we choose. And so what we choose to capture as creatives drives our process. And this creative process in turn can oftentimes drive ourselves. We get this opportunity for this self-reinforcing, kind of self-perpetuating cycle of growth. And what I found on my journey, and maybe I can share some of that with you, is the more I've come to understand about myself, the more I understand about my photography, and the more I understand about my photography, the more I understand about myself. And so it's with these two elements, my creative side, my personal growth, all working together, that I start to kind of, not all the time, bring out what I would like to say is emotional depth within my images. And when we talk about depth, we're talking about elements or aspects of things that lead to meaning. And we're talking about the keys that lie kind of underneath this. And so we talk about depth, we're also talking about emotion oftentimes. And when we think about emotions, yes, there's these emotions charts of what we want to have, what we possibly want to portray, what we personally felt when we were out there within the field. And yet oftentimes when we get done with a scene, we're just sitting there and we're saying, yes, pretty dark or bright, using non-emotional descriptors or non-emotional connections to our work, versus actually understanding more of what our subconscious actually feels emotionally: scared or happy, excited, sad. And so when these elements can come together, that's when we get more impactful images than almost anything else we can do as photographer. So subconsciously, what registers in our brains and impacts actually how we feel is much, much more than the elements we see. And when I talk about elements versus the subconscious, if all we're doing is looking at the elements, all we're seeing in this image is water, waves, rock, maybe some sun, versus the subconscious, the emotional of power, force, awe, and even if we're lucky, sometimes some of that wonder as we go through. So another way to think about this is sometimes that left brain versus right brain discussion or context, or the conscious versus the unconscious, and what is in these different parts and pieces of these different things. So we live about 10% of our time in the conscious part of our brain. This is our thoughts. These are our perceptions. This is where we bring out some of our decision making, the basic decision making. But it's what lies beneath where we get so much more emotional depth. This are our ideas, our imagination, our creativity comes from the subconscious portion. But we also start to bring out our emotions and sometimes our fears. We can start to be able to recognize what we're feeling emotionally and maybe some of what we're impacting or discovering from a fear-based standpoint. So those are our limiting beliefs, things we believe about our work that represents or believe about ourselves on this process. And we can continue to work on all of these things, but we have to be somewhat aware of them. And so when we become more aware, or we talk about awareness in photography, it's opening up the doors within our creativity. It's opening up the doors with our images that's going to allow other people to have their own observation. It's not about the application of technology. It's about the power of observation. So we as creatives, as photographers, we can't control the emotional meaning that somebody's going to have for a tree. So you guys got the contest coming up. You can use this image if you want, for one person compared to another. But what we can do is try to capture that through our powers of observation, not necessarily the application of the technology. So what do we want to go about this? So there's 5 kind of processes or parts to the psychology of photography. The first is sensations and perceptions. How do you perceive the world and make order out of it? I call this part discovery. This is where we start to make order out of our images and see where things fit into this. We learn valuable lessons here of humility, awe, wonder, oftentimes in this. The second is beliefs and creativity. Is where we start to discover some of what we believe in and how we choose to create. I call this part actually creativity. This is where we start to learn what kind of scenes we like, discover how we like to create, and begin to establish some deeper beliefs about our work and about ourselves. Then we get into expression and interpretation. How do we interpret the scenes that are there and then develop them? And thus ourselves, oftentimes through processing. This is where we start to maybe dig a little more into what we're feeling or what we're trying to convey emotionally. But it's also about the physical processing of our images and getting them to align. This part's a lot about development, where we continue to develop and refine our skills as we go. The fourth is foundation and evolution. This is where we begin to explore the kind of photographer we are, we want to be, and maybe a little bit of that where we're going on this process. We begin to explore, we try new techniques and skill, we start to form some elements of our style, maybe even find a little bit of that vision in this period of time. And then the final step, and one we will revisit time and time again, is reflection and refinement. When we get into reflection and refinement, this is where we put ourselves and our processes into a constant state of renewal. We kind of fall into some of that flow. We fall into portions or parts of that renewal journey where every time we're out photographing or capturing or processing or talking about our work or looking at other people's work or talking with other people about their work and what it means to them, or the list goes on and on. We start to get into that renewal where we get new ideas, new formations, new ways to represent ourselves. And there's a lot of power. So let's talk through each one of these stages in a little more detail. So this is where we deal with the first major principle. How do we perceive the world and make order out of it? So talking to Uncle Walt, yeah, I call Whitman Uncle Walt. I think I will go and do nothing for a long time, but listen and accrue what I hear myself and let that sound contribute. So for me, on my journey in my past, I know I have a sacred space in nature. I believe I can find myself time and time again, but I really need to tune into that and listen. And I didn't necessarily know that right out. And Sandy's great introduction kind of led to some portion of how fast my creative journey actually has come, because I took some really aggressive steps initially in the wrong direction. So rewind 5 years ago, and this is Nick Stover past. Yeah, same beard, quite slightly different guy, CEO of a very high growth startup company. I do not hold a psychology degree. I hold an MBA. And my motto for my non-photography professional career was, and I'm not kidding, relentless sense of urgency. But at the time this picture was taken, I was a complete and utter disaster. Workaholism, addictions, all these other things were running rampant as I was continuing to feed a career and an ego that wasn't serving what it was. So I had to make a choice, continue to do what I was doing, or vastly or rapidly change my life. And so I made that choice. I stepped down. I walked away from that CEO role, the ego binds of the MBA, the bickering partners, my ungrateful employees, all the other chaos. And I turned to where I wanted to be and where I, like most of you, find that solace in nature. So I've always wanted to be outside in the nature, climbing, riding bikes, hiking, trail running, didn't matter. But I never considered that all this time in nature, I had another opportunity, and that opportunity to create. So as I started on this journey as a photographer, I didn't even think of myself as a creative, an artist, or someone with anything to say through my work. I just wanted to travel, spend time in nature, and explore. But as I started this exploration of the natural world, I continued to feel that exploration of myself. And some of that beauty, that butterfly, that change was really acknowledging and understanding what I was willing to, or what I had gone through to begin to achieve some of this growth as I went through. And what I found very quickly, or rather quickly, is I mastered much of the technical fairly easily. And my growth as a creative and actually taking compelling images wasn't about latest camera model, perfecting processing methods, traveling to the hottest locations. The best way for me to become a better photographer was to become a more interesting person. So for me then, and even especially today, it's about going through the craft of photography, this craft that we choose to get to access and start to see that person that's actually below and down there. And along the way, especially early on this journey, I had to ask myself lots of hard questions. And as Thoreau likes to say, not until we are lost do we begin to understand myself. So where I had to go, what I wanted to see, where are the greatest opportunities in my work? Where was I weakest? What was I missing on this journey and path? Where did I want to go with my work? And what did I want my work to really represent? What did I want to be seen for? And as I began to quiet that life, quiet those aspects of my destructive side, if you want to think of it that way, I was no longer producing for someone else. I was now producing for myself and what I wanted. And I got to think about what types of scene did I enjoy photographing the most. And what I discovered early on is I didn't really even know what made a scene compelling or why I was reacting to something, but I knew enough to see it in the field sometimes. And what had happened during this time is I started to be able to, one of the first psychology principles we'll talk about, I started to recondition myself, just like one of Pavlov's dogs back, in the, I think it was in the 1950s or so, when he was conditioning these dogs. And I started to think about that related to myself. So even before I was a slobbering dog of a photographer, I was conditioned, or I was unconditioned, I should say, to seeing a beautiful sunset and reacting favorably well before I ever thought about photography. So maybe I picked up that camera expecting that same kind of unconditioned response, but I hadn't conditioned myself. I had a neutral stimulus in my hand and expected creativity and magic to just occur. But then I got out and I started playing around with that periods of time of some of that beauty, some of that really unique parts with a camera in my hand. And as I continued to work my creative process, now almost any time I pick up a camera, I'm dealing with some element of a conditioned stimulus, which is going to produce that conditioned response that I'm seeking, that conditioned response of really jumping into and exploring my creativity. So as I explore my creativity, and this is a little bit of what I want to leave you with, there'll be some stuff at the end, don't worry. I was beginning to ask, but more importantly, to listen to the answers. So it was no longer just about asking questions and then moving on before I got the answers, and more about listening. And I had to be willing, as Joseph Campbell says, to let go of the life I had planned and accept the one that was waiting for me. And so what I was going through was, how was I reacting to, or these are the questions to ask yourself. How are you reacting to what you experience in the field? What are you drawn to on your creative journey? And are you able to think of yourself as an artist or a creator? So as you start to think about these questions and ponder them and how they impact your continued creative journey, your continued growth, either as a photographer or if you think of yourself as an artist, and you should be thinking of yourself as an artist, and I use should very lightly because we have that spirit to create. We start to get into that second phase, that beliefs and that creativity. This is where we start to form thoughts about how we create and what we believe in, where we find the most interest. So this second phase is about how do we connect with a scene. Going back to Thoreau yet again, it's not what you look at, it's what you matter. It's what you see. It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. And when you see a scene like this, people aren't connecting with water or rocks in this particular scenes. You're not connecting with the particular colors per se of the sky. What you're connecting to is how water makes you feel, how being around water makes you feel, how you connect with different textures and feelings within that, and how the colors themselves begin to work off each other. And that begins to be some of the emotion. It's some of how we look at the scene. Yes, our eye is going to be drawn very quickly to that bright kind of sunset as the sun's going down, but there's opportunity to work through and explore the scene in different contexts and perspective. So when we find the types of images that are more compelling, we're having that element of cohesion where things are starting to work together. We're starting to use these elements that lead us into the scene. We're starting to use warms and cools off each other's, darks and brights together. And the eye is able to move in a way that it doesn't feel crowded. It doesn't feel confused. And I'll talk about this with another example coming up. So as we get more connected, we start to form those connections and understand how they can work together. But how do we help others, and ourselves to connect with those scenes? Well, there's basically four main ways, and we'll talk about some of the psychology behind these coming up. So the first is composition. So composition is vitally important, and where and how are we directed within a scene? So this is the principles of composition, which we talk about. I talk about in ad nauseum in my composition class. Lines and shapes are part of this too. How do we help to make order? What types of lines and shapes? And I'll give you some examples. Color. What do certain colors help us to feel or discover, and how do they work? Light. How do we create transitions, tone, depth, and showcase these compositions, these lines, these colors in a cohesive way? So almost every single one of the images we take or we look to create that are going to have more impact are going to have these four elements working together within the scene. So let's start with composition. So the cliche of learn the rules and then break them comes up short. I do not like to talk about the concept of composition rules. I would much rather call them guidelines, ways to help you to understand how scenes are constructed versus things you distinctly or always need to follow. So in the words of Picasso, I love this: learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. And so, yes, you should learn or understand some of these guidelines, these principles that go into an image, but there should not be these things that are holding you back as, oh my God, it doesn't have rule of thirds, or it doesn't have this or whatever else. It's understanding. And we'll talk about that as we keep going. So this image here, I'm going to take a quick drink. This remains a popular image for me, a top seller. And it usually comes with some element of a comment, not comment. Photographers want to tell me, oh, how lucky I was. Non-professionals want to talk about their desire to see a moose. And people that haven't even been outside that much would be like, wow, where is that? Or what is it? And what all of these different things have in common is there's a level of engagement regardless of the skill set. And regardless of the skill set, there's principles at play. A lot of these are composition principles, and we'll talk about that. So the first principle at play is the triangles and the diagonals that are going. So we're forming these shapes within the mountains as we work through this scene, and we go up and down through the mountains, and then we go up and down through the trees. We're getting a tremendous amount of dynamic movement within images. Movement equals engagement, which is a big principle we want with our images. We want the eye, we want the brain to be engaged with the image and not just completely zoning out, but actually following textures, following shapes, following lines as we go through. Another principle that we talk about related to calm is the principles of symmetry. So symmetry, it's one of the most calming things we can do with our images, because the reason is, the brain doesn't have anything it actually needs to balance. It looks at an image like this and it feels balanced to the brain. And so then it can begin to explore and subtly compare. So now it's comparing the bottom reflection to the top reflection. Oh, the tones are a little different. Why? What's going on there? Oh, the moose isn't quite as bright here, but I see the reflection here, etc. And so that calm, it's that place to rest. The brain can go to rest. There's movement, there's engagement. We have a lot of elements of that symmetry that are bringing about nothing that the brain has to do. Oh my gosh, this is all out of whack or whatever else. So calm and symmetry, balance, these things all help, and they continue to work through. And then there's other things that are actual principles, things that make sense as you look at a scene. So we like images to go in general from left to right, if it's at all possible. I could not flip this scene if the moose had come in from the right. And there's two reasons and rationale. One, we read in most cultures from left to right, and people from cultures that don't read left to right have told me that they still prefer to see images go left to right. The other is how we remember and how we vision the future. So we remember by looking up and to the left for the past. And when we're thinking about the future, we tend to look up and to the right. And so it's part of the past on the left and the future on the right. So that's part of a principle to kind of keep in mind, just like the rule of space. And this is one of the rules I would say is important to keep in mind when it's applicable. You can't always have it, but the rule of space is that principle of compression. and the brain not feeling compressed, like, oh my gosh, the mountains have nothing to grow into. Oh my gosh, the moose has no space to move, or whatever else. It's leaving space for the mountains to grow. And this is the concept similar of negative space. The moose has space to move into. There's space for the eye to move around the moose, complete the whole form. This is a lot of the Gestalt principles of completion of things. So space is an important thing, but that's not it. And before we move on from this images and talk about lines and shapes, there's one more big principle in this image beyond rule of thirds. Yeah. It's depth. And depth is one of the most powerful ways we can communicate within our scenes. And what depth does is it brings dimensionality, yes. And dimensionality increases, yes, engagement. And if we're increasing engagement, we're most likely increasing the interactions. We're increasing the time people are spending in an image to find things they like. And that depth comes through layers where we have different subject positioning within that. So we have the reflection. Then we have the reflection of the moose, the grass, the trees, the fog, the mountains themselves, then the sky behind it. A lot of dimensionality. And when we talk about flat images, we're not saying those are bad images. I went back, and if I photographed this thing midday with the sun over the top of my head, it wouldn't be a bad image. It just wouldn't have depth. It wouldn't have dimensionality. It would be a flat image. And so that's one of the values of light in the right context, is to help us provide that depth and dimensionality within there. All right, staying with me, hopefully. And we're going to keep rolling. We're going to talk about number 2, and that's lines and shapes. And how do we grasp and make some order out of the world? So this 2 charts here, feel free to drop me an email. I'll actually put my email in the chat really quick. If you want this or any of the other charts, like the composition chart, I'm happy to send them to you. And I will gladly send them to you later. And what these are is the relationship of lines to emotional response, and then the relationship of mood lines. And I go through this in my composition classes. I won't have time to go through there, but the big takeaway is there's a lot of different lines that are communicating things subconsciously that you may not want to be communicating. You may be communicating things of instability in certain types of lines when you're wanting to communicate much more stability or unity as we go through there. So as we look at lines within our scenes, it's important to think about 2 things, a couple things. That's actually 2. Okay, so we as humans, most of us, have the fortunate capability to see the world in color. But as photographers, and I'm not going to say, I'll put myself in here first and foremost, we can become too reliant at times on color and not actually see some of the forms and structure. Color is a massive emotional driver within our images. So look at a scene like this, and as we strip that color away, turn it to black and white, we start to see more clearly the lines, the shapes, the forms, the sun stars coming out, the lines of the sun kind of going in here, some of the forms related to the curvature of the arch, smaller forms down within the rocks themselves, etc. So we start to see the structure, we start to see the bones, we start to see what's called, the cables of a suspension bridge, however you want to think at it, much more clearly in black and white. So I'm not advocating always photographing black and white, but converting or seeing your scenes in black and white is going to help you. So same thing, going back to this scene or going to this scene. This is in Patagonia. Absolutely, after 8 days, finally got a clear morning. Yes, this was the most epic sunrise, clear morning on this lake. Oh, just love it, love it, love it. Emotional drivers at the wazoo in terms of the color of the clouds, the reflections, the curves, the triangles, et cetera, et cetera. But we take that color away and the image itself still stands. And we have different lines. We have these jagged lines that are moving that are really masculine, picturesque, bringing about a lot of energy, dynamic lines moving back and forth, dynamicism within the clouds, et cetera. But we also have the more feminine lines, the more picturesque qualities that are down within the valley, some of the portions that are formed in the reflections in the trees itself. And so with us, this goes back to the movement. This goes back to how our images are being interacted with and how to start to see some of that structure. The most calming scenes for many people are sunset scenes. Yes, absolutely. There's calming characteristics in the quality of the color of the light. We'll talk about the psychology of color of light, but it's also the lines. And when we look at the lines, the most calming lines within nature are horizontal lines. And we can have things like passive lines, secondary lines that are not the primary portion. They're support. What's in there, passivity. These are lines that are not that, they don't care what happens to them. They could get washed out by the waves. They could get walked on. They could get dried out. They don't really care. It's a passive structure. Then we have the positive, the bold, the forceful lines, the waves crashing. Yes, that's a bold and forceful line. That waves come a long way. It's going to produce something much different than the parallel lines, the second level of lines within the scene. These are imposing. They're still in harmony with each other, even as they work their way through. But we also can get into other types of lines related to the actual horizon themselves. These can be more earthly. These can be more calming as well. And then we also will run into, in some scenes like this, very direct, very shirred lines. These are often man-made structures or ways that are helping to point or shape us in the most direct manner. So as we look at this scene and we go back to color, there's so many of those lines and shapes within there supporting it. But when we go to black and white, we can start to see a little bit how they play out. But the most powerful line conveys something different than the horizontal is the vertical line. And the vertical line is almost everywhere. And yes, again, we get to talk about trees. I want to know if I can enter your guys' contest. I just love trees, but that's neither here nor there. And the thing that trees bring out, there's lots of good stuff, but inspiration is one of the most impactful things. That vertical, that noble, that dramatic, the aspiring portion that they're reaching for the sky and moving up. But in this scene, in black and white in particular, we have things of imposing. We have life versus death. We have something that even in death can maintain regality. They can still stand out. They can still be seen or viewed as very, very strong, a very big part, still impactful. And they're all encouraging us to rise. That's a big part, that aspiration of vertical lines as we go through scenes. All right, so let's go to the third principle, which is color. So the third principle is color and how do we communicate? So there's the psychology of color. This chart's another one. If you email me, I'll send you this chart. Reds, well, we have basically our three primaries and our three secondaries and what they communicate. So we'll talk about our three primaries of red, blue, and yellow and how they communicate what they communicate, and then our three secondaries. So our first is red, a bright, warm color. This evokes more strong emotion. It can bring out a lot more intensity, excitement, intensity as we go through, but with calmer tones. So when we go well into the blue hour, like for this scene, the tones really calm down. We can bring out much more warmth. We can bring out a lot more comfort within our scenes. Then we have blue. And blue, the psychology of blue, calmness, serenity, peaceful, tranquil, secure, orderly, a lot of stability and reliability within blue. Most common, we see blue in skies and water. And it's actually, aside from those two areas, the least common color within nature as a whole, which is why maybe the reason it's people's most favorite color, but we'll see. Then we have yellow. So we got blue, red on the intensity side, blue kind of on the calming side. Yellow is that brightness. It's cheery. It's warm. It's also the most visible, the most attention-getting color, and it will draw a lot of notice. So we have to use it carefully within our scenes, except oftentimes in fall foliage. They will feel very real in a scene like this. Once again, trees. I know I got a thing. So green is our oftentimes the number two most favorite color behind blue. And the thing about green, which is fascinating to me, is it's actually the one we as humans can see the best. And it goes back to our ancestral days when the planet was much more vegetated and we could tell all the different tones and colors of green much better than almost any other color. We could probably discriminate what was food, what was potentially hazardous, prey versus predators, areas of safety, et cetera. So we can disseminate a lot within green, but green's a difficult color as photographers because it's the combination of yellow and blue. There's no such thing as pure green. And so what we get into is some that'll have more of a yellow than green or that bluish green, et cetera. But what green as a whole can symbolize or does symbolize is nature and that natural world. Because of the strong association with nature, green represents tranquility, good luck, health, oftentimes as we go through and work through these particular scenes. So green is a favorite. On the other side is purple. It is artificial oftentimes. It appears more exotic. I can tell you that purple is a polarizing color. People either really love purple or they kind of hate it. It's a royal color. It goes back to the days when they used to have to create dyes, and purple was the most difficult to create. So it was reserved for royalty. But it also has a lot of wisdom and spirituality as you go through. So purple can bring out a lot of different things. And then orange, excitement, enthusiasm, warmth, bright sunsets, citruses. On the main portions of images, they oftentimes will bring out a lot of strong kind of emotion within a scene. So a scene like this, as we're working through. All right, so the final one we'll talk about on the psychology of these kind of four, and then we'll keep going through, is light, and how do we set tone and bring about depth. So lighting and how that happens is the most important natural element we encounter in photography. Yes, composite, all the other things we talked about are vital, but lighting is really where we bring out all these different principles in so much form. We can evoke so much emotion with lighting, the warms to the cools, the shadows to the highlights, the brights to the darks, how we move through, how the lighting creates textures, creates depth, creates sharpness, creates focus. This is all made possible by lighting and as it goes through. So lower lighting is going to exaggerate further. So in my lighting classes, I talk about how light shapes our images. It's basically two angles, two colors, and they can mix. We got 4 different directions of light, and then we have all kinds of different intensity factors. And for today, I'll be able to just talk about the color and what they convey. And the color, blue light, cool light or blue light, they're kind of one and the same. And the thing about cool light or blue light is you don't get direct light on your scene. So you're not going to get secular highlighting blowout. You're not going to get major areas of major brightness and other things that are really dark. And so you're going to get a much more kind of ethereal scene, oftentimes, much more evenly lit. It's going to convey in a scene like this, much more calmness. You're going to get a lot more interaction oftentimes with that, because it's not going to feel kind of like warm light. Warm light, that sunset light's going to feel very cheery. Oftentimes is where we get out a lot of that stuff, but you're going to get a lot more emotional impact. It's going to rise you up a little bit. You're going to react a little more strongly with warm light as you go through. All right. So the next portion is expression and interpretation. So this is about how we process our scenes as we go through. And Whitman, yet again, talks about this. The road to wisdom is paved with excess. The mark of a true artist is their ability to mystify the familiar and familiarize the strange. And I like that concept of mystifying the familiar and familiarizing the strange. So a scene like this one, I'm mystifying a little bit of the familiar of a sand dune. There's some of the familiarity, but there's a little bit of difference between the lines and how they work out, the warms and the cools, the variations and the textures, how you kind of interact with a scene like this as we go through those types of things. And these go into also parts and pieces of how we view our own work. So this is called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And when we talk about the Dunning-Kruger effect, we're talking basically about the variance in our creative work between two things: our confidence on one spectrum and our wisdom on the other, which is a combination of our knowledge and experience. And so as we move through, so this is the starting point as a photographer: low wisdom, low confidence, and we come up to the top, maybe at some point in time, of Mount Stupid, it's somewhat called, and I think it's a bad name. But the concept at the top of this is I know everything. I'm good. I've taken some really good images. Wow, this is really great. I printed some stuff out. And then we go, whoa, wait a second. There's way more to this than I thought. And we fall into the valley of despair. I'm never going to understand this. And this is where most people quit. They don't start this path. They think, oh, I can get right back up here again. No problem. They'll climb up a little. They don't click. It doesn't come through, and they stop. They don't keep going. They don't start that slope of enlightenment where things start to make a little bit of sense. I get this. I see what's happening. I'm seeing how I can work through this. Oh, I need to learn this technique, or I can understand how that image was created, etc. When we start to get into that plateau of sustainability. And when we talk about the plateau of sustainability, it's not that, oh, I have everything figured out. It's an understanding of, trust me, it's complicated. And the trust me, it's complicated is yes, there's a lot of variables, a lot of things we have to balance, a lot of things we get to work through, but we're continuing kind of a level climb or keeping kind of slightly incrementally moving up. So this comes into how we view our work. And then part of the principle also is how do we show our work? How do we display our work? And the 5 things I've talked about, which now I want to show examples, are depth. So how do we bring out dimensionality? Where can we focus on transitions? Focus. Where and how do people want to look within our images? Sharpness. Should all things go from near to far on sharpness? No, those that are closest to you should oftentimes be the sharpest, or should be the sharpest, because that's the same way our eye sees. Textures. What do people want to feel and what do they want to touch? And then we have luminosity. Eye will always go to the brightest parts within images without fail. So when we talk about expression and interpretation, these are the 5 principles to really understand, because these are the things you're going to want to try to show. When we get to the critique portion, I'm going to show some of these techniques in Lightroom to help bring out these 5 particular elements. And so depth. How do we bring out dimensionality? How do we take a tree, in this case, yes, trees, I know, got a thing. This is called a foxtail pine in the High Sierra, and bring out some dimensionality. We have beautiful curves and lines. Curves are the most elegant line you can follow. Grace and elegance all the times in curves, but how can I bring out dimensionality? And that's oftentimes through depth. So between lights and darks and between particular parts of the image, somewhat of the cools and the warms is bringing out depth within a scene like this. Focus. Where do I want people to look within my scenes and how am I going to direct? So I take this image the first time without my buddy, without anybody in it. And I'm like, okay, it's okay, but I'm going to drop down lower. I want to frame it in a little bit. I want to put some context into what you would see or what you would feel and kind of help the scene. Hey, Andrew, get in there and help me see the scene, help me people feel. I want them to focus on you subtly, but go right to the comment and take a look. Similar concept on sharpness. Should go from near to far. We shouldn't have things that are closest to us blurry most of the time, nor should we have the sharpest part of our images be at the back. It should be sharper kind of in the front, and then we can transition into our scenes. We have that capability the same way I saw this scene, to have things close to us sharp and those further away. Textures. What do people want to touch? This is the engagement, the interaction. So as we understand our textures, we're going to be building on or working on those. So the textures of the cactus. Yeah, I'm going to put a little bit extra white into there. I'm going to put a little bit more sharpness into that cactus. So it really feels like, wow, I could feel that cactus versus the clouds. I want them to continue to feel feathery. I want them to feel very light as you look up at those types of things. Luminosity, final principle here, and then we'll keep moving on into exploration. I will always go to the brightest spot without fail. And this is where we focus on contrast. So we can use the stairway in this case, but that light, your eye is going to go so quickly out to that sun and the beams that are out there that there's not much need to focus it anywhere else. It's going to follow that path very quickly and very easily as we go through. All right, so kind of moving through exploration. So we've worked through discovery, creativity, development. How about exploration? Joseph Campbell wants to guide us a little bit. One way or another, we all have to find what best fosters the flowering of our humanity in this contemporary life and dedicate ourselves to that. So formation and evolution, we will visit this stage many times on our journey. And the things I will remind you, just like a Rorschach inkblot test, we all see the world a little bit differently. We all will make a little bit of a different context, a little bit of a different belief, a little bit of a different meaning on the types of scenes we see out there and how we see or how we choose to portray them. So this is my own version of a Rorschach inkblot test. This is a bristlecone pine root. Yes, once again, trees. And I took a different interpretation. A, it's completely rotated into horizontal orientation. B, I boosted the saturation a little more than I usually would. It was a pretty red tree on a pretty red sunset night, but I wanted it to feel, I wanted it to portray, I wanted some of those mysteries. I wanted to see the world and portray my world a little bit differently is there. The other principle of this is intentionality versus opportunism. So really being intentional behind what we create. This is where we work and we see our creative processes differently. We start to experience some of those elements of design So we walk a scene. We're not reacting to what's there. We're actually kind of we're seeing how the light's playing out. We're seeing what kind of elements we like within the scene. We're looking forward just a hair. Okay, well, maybe if the sun continues to set and those clouds stay there, okay, maybe I'll have some lighting kind of casting through there as I work through. I could use some leading principles, etc. So it's intentionality into our images that often help. But the thing we have to avoid is what's called Beck's cognitive triad. And where this comes from is oftentimes we'll see this negative views about the world. I'm going to talk about this related to photography, not politics. Don't worry. And we're going to talk about it's all been photographed before. And these are things I've heard people say to me in classes or private lessons, etc. Oh, it's all been photographed before. I don't know what to do. I don't know, blah, blah, blah. And then it'll start to go into negative views about the future. I'm never going to figure this out. I can't figure out RAW. I can't figure out Lightroom. I'm just never going to figure this out. But then the worst is when they get those negative views about oneself. There's just too much to learn. And the thing about Beck's cognitive triad, which most of us have identified in other parts of our life, is it's not true. And the creative journey is all about understanding a little bit of these voices, but also knowing to overcome these. It hasn't all been photographed before. You are going to be able to figure it out. It's just a matter of adjusting your timeline. And there is a lot to learn, but you can break it into chunks. And so we're going to talk about the last bit. But before we do, I want to quickly run through some upcoming offerings. And then we'll end with the last section and then get into Q&A. And then we'll spend time, the rest of our time together in the image critique. So 22nd and 29th of May, I'm teaching a 6-hour class on seascapes. One of my more popular 2-day classes I teach. 3 hours on Saturday, 3 hours the next Saturday. Going to talk about planning and capturing them the first week. The second week's going to be all about processing, including you guys bringing your images in, and we're going to work on processing them together. I also have a bunch of new formatted classes called processing pods. These start next Wednesday, and they're going to continue in through June, and then one more in July. And they're going to be things like how to do image blending, focal length blending, focus stacking. I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to show about local adjustments in Lightroom as well. So if you wanted to use these local adjustments, it comes with my local adjustment presets. So there's a whole pack that you'll get that you can load in to do a whole bunch of stuff, some of which I'll show you. We're going to do night scene processing. We're going to do things like Milky Way. I'm going to show you how to star stack. I'm going to show you how to do a moon composite. So you can take a moon, focus maybe at one focal length and another moon for a wide angle like this scene and blend the two together. They're photographed at the same time, but I blended them together later. Things like eclipse composites, etc. And then the final one will be processing light in our images. So when we get dynamic light, how do we process it? How do we work with it? It's a lot more different than undynamic light when we work our scene. So maybe you'll join for one of the processing pods. I'm also formatting and reworking all of my infield workshops. These are some of the ones. So yeah, Trees of the Sierra, come on out. I'm going to do one just on that. But if you want to go on and put a vote in or put anything in on any of these are on my website under future workshops. Final two things, and then we'll finish up the presentation talking about the final phase. I'm doing my next free presentation on May 24th about discovery of our creative and artistic vision. So I do free presentations about once a month on particular topics. This one's going to go into some elements of how I found parts and pieces of my vision, my style, what techniques you can use to kind of help guide it, help find it, kind of work yourself through some of that process. And then final thing I will say is I have a bunch of cost-effective tutorials. Most of them start at $15, where I go into much more detail on light and color, composition, Lightroom, darkroom. I shouldn't say darkroom because I don't do darkroom. Photoshop, luminosity masking, preparing your images, print, etc. So those are all on there. All of my classes, all of my workshops, 100%, all my tutorials, 100% money back guarantee. If you try one or you take one, it doesn't fulfill what you wanted or expected, ask for your money back. I'm happy to give it to you, and we'll move on. So, all right, last section. All right, reflection and refinement. And that is putting ourselves into that constant state of renewal. And with Joseph Campbell, yet again, I like Joseph Campbell. Yes. Your sacred space is where you can find yourself again and again. And I just really hope for all of us, especially in these times we're going through, that photography can really continue to be or become that sacred space we go through. And part of that one of the last psychology concepts I want to leave you in is social facilitation. And what we see is not social competition. So you guys in camera clubs understand this much more than other people that aren't in camera clubs. We're not competing against other people per se, as much as we are against our former self. And as we socially facilitate things, we become better creatives because we have the opportunity to learn and share our experiences, and other people have the opportunity to get better from that, and we get better from them. So I love social facilitation because we can encourage each other by learning through creative criticism, through constructive criticism, through relevant criticism. And I think that's the most important thing, is the relevance of the criticism. As people, I don't like that picture. That's not relative criticism. Relevant criticism would be, well, this image has some ailment, or I can see what you're going to do, but you maybe would want to consider changing that or whatever. So that social facilitation is going to make us better. All right, some action items for you before we go into the last bit. So take some time to find some elements of your style. I'll talk about this a little bit in the vision class, but if you don't know what your style is, or what your portfolio looks like, or what you like photographing, simple exercise: print off 50 of your favorite images and start to group and sort them. So composition, focal length, types of scenes, types of day, you'll start to group things. You'll start to see patterns as well. The other thing, especially towards the tail end of COVID and as we're starting to get out, is some photographic amnesia. So do not get attached to locations, times of day, etc. If you have places you've gone to, feels like a million times, when can you go there at different times? Find new ways to look at your environment, your scenes, your processes. My favorite place to go here on the Central Coast, there's some sand dunes. Absolutely love them. But the issue I run into is I usually go out at golden hour, and I usually go out with my wide angle, and that's pretty much it. Well, now I've started going out with just my 50 millimeter, just in the morning times or just midday. And I see the scenes differently. I process, I find things differently. And then invest. This is the best time to invest in your learning. There's so many great meetup groups out there. I've been picking up a lot of really great photography books, tabletop photography books for about $5 a pop off thrift books. Local libraries right now have so much photography related stuff. It's great. YouTube, and the camera clubs themselves. I love camera clubs. I love presenting. So I want to say thank you to you guys for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I think we'll probably take questions before we do the image review. How does that sound?
That sounds good. Do we want to, open it up? So gallery view. And
All right, can I start with one?
yeah.
Yes, Diane.
All right. So it was very
she's got a
interesting.
PhD behind her name. I'm in trouble.
Oh, sorry. That's my work. I put it up there. Okay. Yeah, it's biochemistry, pilot and higher and deeper. Yeah. So it's interesting. So at the beginning, you were talking about the conscious brain, right? So it's the iceberg and there's the 10%. And you were saying you have to find a way to pull yourself out of that conscious brain, right? But then at the end, you were talking about the valley of despair, right? So there's it looks like there's a lot of places where we need to pull ourselves out of. So maybe you can just give us some of your personal stories about how you pulled yourself out of your own valley of despair, or pulled yourself out of your conscious brain.
I love it. No, it's excellent because it's the paradox of, it's the absolute paradox of creativity. A, you need to love your work enough that you believe in yourself. B, if you love it too much, then you become a narcissistic jerk that nobody likes. And it's a similar thing on the conscious versus the unconscious needs. So the continued thing I find time and time again is just more, I practice a lot of awareness. So I do daily meditation as part of my body awareness, situational awareness. I journal every day. So people say, oh, you must photograph every day. And I'll tell you, straight across, there's months I don't photograph at all. I'm home. I'm gone a lot, but when I'm home, I don't usually photograph all that often if the conditions aren't right or whatever or else. But I'm always working on my creativity. So I'm always doing some element of creative daily reading. I'm always doing some journaling, and all of these little things are bringing me into the present. The other big part of getting out of my conscious brain and into my unconscious is when I go to scenes I try to even set my backpack down with all my stuff in it and walk the scene for a while, and kind of observe with my eyes and my other senses, kind of what am I smelling? What am I seeing? And then just look visually within the scene versus like camera out, tripod lockout, problems kind of ensue and sort of that kind of perspective. So really walking the scene, seeing what we're dealing with, and then also would then start to evaluate a little bit of what we're drawn to versus evaluating, oh, if I photograph this F16, blah, 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 I would have what I want. No, I'm really drawn to these lines or these shapes over here, or I like this texture over here. Okay, well, maybe now I'll begin to take the camera out of the bag or whatever else, but it's usually quite a while. So that's another one of the techniques on the conscious versus the unconscious. But the biggest is just that continued awareness of whether it's like thinking or feeling. And it's a work in progress, but I can just tell you through my creative work, that development, there's a book called The Artist Way by Julia Cameron, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's a 12-week program that you can really help to get in touch with more of kind of that creative process far beyond just being in our brain. She has a lot of different exercises. One of us, she's like artist dates and a bunch of other stuff, which is really cool.
And actually, that's really interesting. If I could have a follow-up one just to go about, walking a scene. So we're very visual creatures. So do you ever try and draw from all your 5 senses? Like you smell and you feel the texture or whatever, just to get...
I do. Yeah. I actually, we went out hiking in this remote area a couple weeks ago. There was 4 of us hiking. And I came back, I had 3 ticks bit into me. Nobody else had a single tick. And they're like, how did you get so many ticks? It's because when I'm walking, I wasn't even out photographing. I'm like, I'll drape my hands through the grass. I'll like touch the trees. Sometimes if we stop places, I'll literally like pick up the rocks or the dirt and look at them.
So you're literally hugging the trees.
Yeah. I haven't gotten to the point of like grinding up a pettis and like rubbing it all over my face or anything, but yeah, sensory stuff. I mean, especially some of my more impactful images are ones where if I close my eyes or even think about it, I can like, I'll feel like the wind. I can still kind of feel that wind or some of the smells that are out there. Oh gosh, I have some seascape scenes where you could just, the sea fog or the sea foam was just so thick. You could just like, but yeah.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Well, those are 2 excellent questions. So. Nobody else wants to ask questions now?
Drop the mic.
Mine's more of a technical question. It looked like on the last photo you put up there, you used flash in the foreground. And it looked like on that red pine, there was flash used. Is that true or not?
No, it's, I'll share it again real quick. It's actually a single image, light painted with my headlamp. And there is no flash. It was just like literally like less than a second with my headlamp on the scene. So it's a single image. What you're probably seeing on the tree, and I've sold this print both ways, is the light pollution in that area. So this is down on the Central Coast, was pretty hard, but it was not a flash. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I got one in the chat that said Jeffrey Thompson, Creativity Meditations Brainwave Theory. Interesting. All right. Other questions before we do the critique?
Nick, this is Mike. You didn't talk much about equipment. We talked about more of the psychology aspect. I was just curious, your preference on the equipment side?
So I'm a Nikon guy. That's just by what I learned with, and I'm but a lot of the images in the presentation, there's a decent amount of them in the presentation that are shot with a Canon PowerShot when I backpack. I actually, I think it just showed up when I was presenting, got a Z5, my first mirrorless, and it's the entry level Nikon mirrorless. And that's just because for backpacking weight, et cetera. So I shoot Nikon. That's just my personal preference. I can tell you in teaching, I don't see much difference from the different models or whatever. The big limitation, and this is what I work with clients, especially as we start to get ready for any type of night photography, is that's where the limitations of gear kind of runs into play. So people that are trying to shoot with a 35 millimeter lens f5.4, not getting the kind of results they want. Yes, you need to have the wider angle, you need to have non-crop sensor, et cetera. But the biggest thing is understanding the three biggest, most impactful things. And a lot of people do this. And for those, maybe you all do this, but I'm going to say it anyways. Understand the exposure triangle and always photograph in manual mode is one of the top things I say. The second is always photograph in RAW. Even if you're not comfortable yet processing your RAWs, you can capture both RAW and JPEG. So I'll have clients that like, I'm not comfortable with RAW yet. And I tell them photograph both RAW and JPEG. You'll thank me in like 2 years when you finally get comfortable with RAW. And then I've had clients email me like a year and a half, 2 years later and say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I was capturing those early images in RAW now that I know how to process, blah, blah, blah. So photographing in RAW, photographing in manual mode. And then I guess the third is understanding the exposure triangle. So how those three play out. And then when you really have those down, oh, third's processing, sorry. Processing images every single time you should be processing your images. Don't be ashamed of processing your images. You don't have to, go crazy, but always be processing because of these little subtle things. And then when you start reaching those limitations, like you start discovering, wow, I understand my exposure triangle. I've pushed my camera to the degree of what it needed to be, and I'm not getting the results I want. Then email me and we can help figure out what you need from there. I'm not saying you in particular, but, and then what I found also on the gear side is my focal length is becoming much longer. I used to be almost exclusively wide angle. And now I'm doing much more, I just bought a 50 millimeter prime because that seems to be kind of the range I'm shooting more and more these days. So focal length wise.
Well, let's move on to I think we're all sort of anxious for the image critique.
Well, it's going to be different, like I said. So let's, all right, pull up some Lightroom. Okay, so let me do a couple quick things, which I never seem to remember until I get like 5 minutes into Lightroom. Then I'm like, oh, have I done this? So 1 second, I got to pull up this cursor thing that helps me to point better. And I'm going to switch my screen resolution that helps you to see better.
Yeah, and so what I'm going to do is just ask everybody to turn again off their video and audio. And then if you engage with them, they, can easily.
Yes, for sure.
Good.
All right, so I think I got him. I think there was only 15. Oops, no, I just lost the one, which is good because so the way I'm going to do this, so great images in here, and I haven't, I got to switch my webcam down a little too. So the way I'm going to do this from my perspective, A, I'll do a little bit of a critique, but B, on a lot of these images, I'm going to show those techniques related to the 5 principles I was talking about: depth, light, depth, luminosity, sharpness, and focus. And so how can we bring out more depth? How can we improve or modify a little bit of the focus, bring out more of the textures, et cetera? And these are going to be using the local adjustments. So that's a lot of the way I do critiques. Isn't just like, well, you could do this, that. I'm actually going to show on your image directly, just using the local adjustments, what you could change. So most camera clubs really like it. Some people hate it, but we'll find out. So. All right, Charles. Anything you want to say on this one before we jump in?
Sometimes I like this image, sometimes I don't. This is
Well, that's good. I have those too. So, all right. So a couple things on these types of scenes. Well, we got a little bit of that symmetry where the eye and the brain are going to compare between the two children, which is kind of nice to be able to kind of work its way through. If we're talking about luminosity principles and some of the other stuff, there's a little bit of space kind of here in the back where we could get lost, where we could kind of drift back in and kind of get lost versus focused in the front scene is one of the principles. It looks like you've already vignetted the image some, which is a good choice. So the couple techniques I'm going to show related to ways to darken parts and pieces. So what I'm going to go for, and these are just showing techniques, not necessarily things you absolutely have to change, but I'm going to darken this area in the back, just showing a technique. So the technique, so if we go into the develop module, we will do a radial filter back here on this portion. And we're going to do it kind of pretty small, and then what we're going to do is we're going to come down to the range mask down here at the bottom. So we're in the local adjustments here, and we're going to come down to the range mask and we're going to turn it on to luminance, which is going to focus on the brightness. And we're going to hold down the Alt or Option key, and we're going to start to range mask in. And what's going to happen is that which is in the white is going to get the adjustment. And so what's already in the black, we don't need to darken that anymore, but we need to darken some portion of what's back there. So it's going to be much more selective when we do it. And this is a JPEG file that's already been compressed versus a RAW. And as we darken, you can see now we're adjusting, and we can adjust our radial a little bit as well. So all we're doing is just darkening these portions back here. So maybe we're going to kind of pull it over like that. We can adjust our feather if we need to as well. And so we're pulling that in. So we're darkening the exposure, and then we can even go a couple steps further, taking down the highlights. I would usually sometimes in these kind of situations take down some clarity, take down a little bit of sharpness as well. And then if we look at our before and after on a JPEG, it's not that dramatic, but we've taken away the brightness back there and really brought more in. The second thing, and I don't do a ton of portrait work, and there's all kinds of different principles, so I'm just demonstrating a technique, is we want to pull focus onto the faces and the engagement there. And the technique I use, regardless if it's faces or if it's objects or if it's wildlife or if it's a particular point in focus, is I do what's called a radial within a radial sometimes, but I'm going to demonstrate this now. And so what we're going to do is do a radial on this child's face here. And we will double check to see what we're doing. And we're on right now, just on her face or his face. And we're going to invert it, and we're going to take everything outside. So we're affecting everything else outside of that particular one. And now we'll turn that, and we're going to darken about, we're going to go down about a stop on the child's face here. And then we'll duplicate this one on this one, and we'll come over to this child. And this is where it becomes a little sticky because we have two different, and then we're going to take it up in a stop. So we're going to bring back, except I got to reinvert it. And now we're going to bring it up a stop on this child's face over here. So now we've, in those two quicks, real quick, we've pulled more of the focus onto the children themselves. And so into the faces, and we've darkened some of the other scene as well. So we don't see as much out there. So there's our befores and our afters. And then we can take it kind of a step further. Okay, now we've kind of gotten to the point where things outside of the scene are darkened and we can see the children more. And then usually here is where I would actually warm up, because the eye goes towards luminosity and warmth more. So adding a little bit of temperature here, adding a little bit of temperature. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so adding temperature on this one, and then we have to do a second radial over on this one, sorry, which is fine. So now actually we don't want to add warmth here because we're darkening the whole scene. So we're just going to keep that where it was, and then we'll duplicate one more and then invert that one. And then on the one we just duplicated, leave it where it was, and then add some warmth on the one we just duplicated there, maybe not quite that much. And so if we look before and after, now we've warmed both of their faces, brought in just by the radial portions a lot more into the scene. So this is the kind of premise that you can use on a wide variety of different photography.
Thank you that's interesting. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah,
That was
great.
good.
Maybe you like it a little more.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, Roger. Wow, that's a beautiful one. Looking at this one in more detail, a lot of great stuff in this scene. So is this one Roger on?
No, I don't see him. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was, but not now.
Okay. Well, you'll be able to look at the recording. So looking at this scene, the only minor issue I'm seeing is I'm seeing some haloing on the horizon. So this is probably a blend of some sort. And then we're also right around here, we've it's darker on the steeple than I kind of would expect. So I don't know how he blended, but blending this using a luminosity mask in Photoshop, you could have feathered the blend in just a hair or more. And then also when you did it, there's an opportunity to get some of this haloing you can see out of there. It's not a big deal, but some of that out. The other thing I would say about an image like this, going back to the principle of space, would have been leaving a little bit of space kind of in between the different fireworks for the eye to move. So kind of like maybe deleting, I think this is a composite, deleting this one out here, possibly either deleting or moving this one, deleting these ones, deleting one of these two and kind of moving things over. So the variation of the shapes, the different sizes is phenomenal. And you could create kind of a pattern of movement between the different smaller ones and the larger ones to kind of move through a scene like this a little bit. So you could kind of, by taking these ones out and moving this one over and deleting one of these two and maybe keeping this one over, taking this one, moving over here, you could have some small and some big and the eye would be able to move and kind of flow within the scene. So we have some lines here that are kind of leading in, which kind of helps a whale. So my thoughts on that one. All right. That's a very big house cat. So Bella, any?
Bella is here.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my shot from the Pantanal.
Nice.
And I
So
did have,
my thoughts on this. So the principles of space are phenomenal. Having the space around the Jaguar as a whole is phenomenal. This is one of the ones where I would flip it and have that movement of the Jaguar going from left to right versus from right to left. It's going to read differently, but it reads a little bit more of that movement, and it feels a little more like potentially like it's coming out. That's just my kind of interpretation. The other tweaks I would make, I would darken this tree over here on the right a fair amount. So I do like a grad filter on this one. You can do it pretty aggressive, kind of something like this, and then I would darken down the tree, and we could do it. You could do it as a range mask if you didn't want to darken the bright portions, but something like that is going to keep the focus on to the Jaguar himself. And then the other thing I would do, so these are some of the different effects I have built. So everything from adding light sources to blurring backgrounds and then enhancing details and wave stuff, etc. These I sell them for $10, or you get them with my class I teach next week. I have one called Enhanced Details, which is increasing exposure, increasing shadows, increasing whites, texture, clarity, dehaze, and sharpness. And I'm going to do a radial on the face itself. And this is the JPEG, so it's actually going up quite a bit. And what I'm trying to do is pull in more of the detail on that. So I'm actually not going to add as much exposure because it's pretty bright to begin with. And actually, so I'd actually take that down, probably not even open up the shadows, take the whites down a hair, but adding that texture. So texture is going to be the smaller details, sharpen the smaller details. Clarity is going to be the larger details. So kind of pulling in ever so slightly. So if we did those two transformations, we've shifted that focus there a little bit more into here. And you could do similar to I did with the children earlier. You could also do another vignette as well. And this one would be on kind of the thing itself, the cat itself, inverted. So we can double check what we're doing. We just hit the mask overlay. And now that's everything outside of the face, and then darken the portion kind of outside of the face, maybe not quite that aggressively. Back up, and then you could open up the shadows a hair. And so that's like another more subtle vignetting to kind of pull in just a little bit more. So be my thoughts on that particular scene.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate it. And I see your point. I think you improved it.
Well, you took it, so it's the magic's there. So, all right, Mr. Bosk.
I'm here.
All right, anything you want to say about?
So just that I took this a year ago, walking downtown, and that's like the kind of places where the trucks pull up and drop stuff off, that ledge of a delivery spot. And I just was struck by the fact that that had been somebody's place to sleep the night before, or a couple nights. And kind of, I converted to black and white because it seemed the most appropriate way to go with it, and kind of like the grittiness of it.
Yes, I agree. There's that storytelling, that investigation portion as well, and we have different textures, different lightness and darkness within this. So we're getting some of that tonal variation. So what I'm going to show another technique I use a lot, and that is on the tone curve. And so people come in all the time and grab the tone curve and just flail it around. But the thing about it that Lightroom has in particular is they have this region adjustment down below. And rather than having to figure out exactly what you're doing on the tone curve, if you watch the regions, it's doing exact things down there. So I will oftentimes come in, and when you're adjusting the tone curve, it's adjusting your midtones. It's not adjusting your darkest blacks or your brights, and it's pushing more and it's bringing out more detail in the midtones. And the midtones is where so much of the drama and the information lives. And so I'd be playing around with my midtones, kind of taking the darks down a little bit, and then maybe taking my whites up ever so slightly, taking the highlights down potentially a little bit as well, because I'm watching the histogram and I'm wanting to push over. And then I look at my shadows. I have a lot of darkness over here. I could probably shift some of that kind of in, and now we're kind of boosting that back up. And I'm watching also within the scene, and maybe it's not adding at this particular time, but it's adding a little bit. I feel like it's adding a little bit more kind of depth and dimensionality within there. The next change I would do on a scene like this in particular is I would definitely vignette. So you could do a little more aggressive, because we want to push in once again to the center. So we've vignetted down about 25. And the thing I'm always looking when I do vignettes is I'm always looking at my little navigator thumbnail over here. And so I don't want to have the vignette be evident on that thumbnail. So something like that is very evident. So I'm usually between 15 to a max of 25 on a vignette. The scene could do a little more. So now we're brushing in there, and now okay, so now we have this in. Now what do we want to bring out? And this one would be one I probably would do like local brushing. So like that enhanced detail one I did, earlier, I would do on the boots themselves to kind of bring out more of the textures within the shoes themselves. And so we're kind of getting those in a little bit. And then on some of the other stuff, you could either choose to soften it, or you could choose to even do some dodging and burning. There's just a wide variety of ways to go. But one of the things I would consider, maybe just going, I'll just zero this out, and is I didn't want to zero out my brush actually. Sorry about that. So I would possibly like softening up some of the other portions so they look even more dramatic. So we could do that a couple ways. We could do a radial around the shoes themselves, and then invert it. And then we could take down some of the sharpness outside of the shoes, because we don't necessarily need these are softer details. We don't necessarily need those, but taking down some of the sharpness, kind of the whole, then this is gonna, if we look at it now, this is the before and after. The shoes we're seeing the textures of the shoes that were left, and we've softened what should be soft in the background some already as well, kind of pulled in. So those would be the changes. And then the other thing always do on, I don't do this on color images, but black and white, I'll oftentimes look at my contrast slider, and you can go really extreme. But I will add a fair amount of contrast oftentimes to black and white images because they can usually stand up. So this would be our before and our after.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah, nice.
It took the vision about 5 steps further down the road.
Well, it's what we get. It's what we get to do sometimes with our images, and that's the value oftentimes of having other people look at our work. That is like they may have a vision that's like I've had one. I did this image. I had like the clearest vision I've seen for anybody's image ever, and I was like doing this and that to help it. And the guy get done with it, and the guy's like, I hate it. I hate every bit of it. I was like, okay, well, I'm just showing you what you could do and how you could take it. So, it is what it is. So,
Well, thank you.
yeah, absolutely. All right, Lewis.
Yep, I'm here.
All right. Anything you want to say about this lovely image?
Well, this came about from at the beginning of COVID. I went out and bought some calla lilies and set up a little home studio and was doing some macro shots of them. And at first, the first series that I was doing were the ones where I was trying to get as most sharp as possible by using aperture and tracking. But that same day and early the next morning, I really figures, and I've always been sort of interested in looking into abstract photography and sort of what makes it tick and why certain images work because they're abstract to begin with. So that I really just wanted to get your opinion, of this one.
Nice. Yeah. This is I would consider this particular scene more of what I would call a small scene or an intimate landscape than an actual abstract. So the way I define abstract is something you can't necessarily tell the form and the function of what it was, and it doesn't necessarily represent. So if it was something like this, and I'm cropping in pretty small, that's a little bit more like abstract from that perspective, because I can't tell if it's a tree. I can potentially tell it's a leaf, but maybe not, versus this particular scene. I personally know it's a calla lily. So it's more of an intimate, it's somewhat of a macro, but more of an intimate macro than it is per se an abstract. An abstract would be more of a rendition of that particular thing. But from an intimate perspective, there's a lot of really nice elements in here. When we talk about focus, we really have a lot of the focus in a nice area when we're seeing these almost the ribbing on those the parts of the lily. You have that space going around that I talked about before. You're showcasing the curves. Anytime we can showcase curves in our work, there's a lot of grace and elegance with those. So finding our way through those particular parts and pieces as well. So you're definitively on the right track with solid instincts and good technique, especially as I look up here. These are the kind of things I want to see. When I look at the histogram, this is one of the ones that I think we'll see a more dramatic tone curve, because we can push some of the darker tones a little bit into the bright over here. So if we're watching, just shifting it's not shifting like look at the darks. We're just shifting over some of the brights a little bit. And then we have a little teeny bit of clipping going on right here. So sometimes we can shift down the highlights ever so slightly. So we're just pushing, kind of compressing the data into the center part of the histogram, where we're going to get a little bit more kind of depth out of that particular thing. And so we can look at what we want to do with our shadows. Maybe we want to take the shadows down just a little bit to kind of convey. So now we're conveying more of these transitions as well. And so now it's focusing more in on some of these types of things. So this is the before, this is the after, kind of shifting things around. So those are some things to think about in terms of just the form and the function of what you're working with. But I definitely think you're on the right track.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. All right, Mr. Levy.
Levy.
Sorry.
It's okay. A lot of people get it wrong.
That's all right. You can call me. I got called Stoner recently on a camera club introduction. So I'm like, I've heard that before.
Good.
All right. Anything,
Well,
another black and white. I like it. Another tree bark.
Yeah. As with some other people, I was exploring my immediate surroundings during the early days of the pandemic and finding a really surprising number of just really interesting images popping out all over the place. This particular one I sent in for your presentation because it is highly abstract. I think you can sort of barely tell that it's tree bark. And these dark shapes really resonate for me. To me, it's not a picture of something so much as a picture that represents something.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking of Picasso and his bull.
Interesting. I could see
So I
some
was
of
just
that.
interested to see, what your take is on this. I'm really not looking for so much suggestions to change it, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm very happy with it.
Okay. I was gonna pull up in Photoshop and show you one thing to consider when you get an image like this. The other thing, I'm not telling you need to change it. Have you experimented with rotating it, different directions, and how it feels?
I don't think I did with this one. I do sometimes with abstracts,
Yeah.
but it's usually pretty obvious to me, in short order.
Yeah. Sometimes I just know on my particular abstracts or these types of things how they read, and it very well is, because this, I think, is the main kind
See,
of almost.
This also has a sense of flames, which of course would be going up.
Yeah. Yeah. And the way I was thinking was the other way to look at it is, and it'll take me just real quick. Going downwards, the only other one of that movement kind of moving down, but I think it's that I'm not telling you should do it things differently. I'm just, for the demonstration purposes of other people, a lot of times on the abstracts, I'm wrote like that tree one I showed you from the tree root. I rotated. That's not the way I took it. I took it much more in a portrait mode, but as I processed and looked at it, I liked it a lot more in horizontal landscape, focusing up there. So that's one of the things to look at. So the way I look at scenes like this, regardless of the interpretation, I think your those instincts as well, those lines, we got those vertical lines we were talking about. There's a lot of power and movement in those. This one follows a similar composition principle called rule of odds, where if we have things that are in odds, so you have basically 5 cracks here. Those are sometimes a lot more compelling than things that are in evens. And it's somewhat how the brain will look. So 3, 5s, or 7s, it'll start to section things off and compare. And if they're in 2s, that it'll compare one versus the other and kind of move on. But it's something like this. It'll look at the different cracks, what's forming them, kind of what's going on as well. So, but in Photoshop, what I was going to show real quick, if that's okay, is one of the techniques I use. Can you see my Photoshop now?
Yes.
All right. And it's giving me.
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. It's giving me a little bit of a hard time. Not a hard time. It's just bigger screen. So the thing I love, I'm going to get out of this. The thing I do a lot of in Photoshop is dodging and burning using luminosity masks. And a scene like this, you're going to work the way to bring out more of the variation. You potentially could work the way of bringing out more of the color and variation. And so I'll start with something. I'll go through the darks ones, and what's getting highlighted in white is what's going to be adjusted on the mask. And so you can see, like if I put a mask on right now, it's really going to darken up the cracks within there a lot more. And this is going to potentially bring out a little bit more of that dimensionality. So this within the TK stuff. So I would do a darken on that, and it'll bring up a black brush for me. Already preset, and I'll just paint that portion a little bit.
TK, you meant Tony Kuiper's?
Yeah, Tony Kuiper. Yeah, TK7, Tony Kuiper masks. It could be TK6 is the TK6 he gives it. They have a free free one you can download. I teach this in my luminosity mask class. But if we look at the before and the after now, and we can adjust our luminosity of the mask in particular, but now we're bringing out a little bit more of the depth potentially down within there.
To
if
me,
that's-
honestly, it's starting to look muddy.
Well, it's a JPEG, so versus a raw
No,
file.
I mean, like the shadows are blocking up.
Yeah, because it's a JPEG and not a raw file. If this was a raw file, it wouldn't be blocking. So like this is a compressed JPEG.
But you mean if it was like a PSD or a TIFF?
Yeah, PSD or a TIFF, it wouldn't be blocking. And then if they are starting to look muddy, then you can adjust the opacity of it a little bit. But what this is doing is showcasing you. This is the technique to showcase more of the lines if you wanted to do that, or more of the brightness. If you want to leave it exactly the way it is, it's totally fine. I'm just trying to show ways if you want to change subtle things within the images, these are ways to do it. So similar thing on the lights. So the lights is going to target the lights portion of it. So if you wanted to bring out just a little bit more of the lichen or something else, you could do a dodge layer just on the lights portion. And so because what we're going for, I'm going to go out of there, sorry, is oftentimes what we're going for in these images is these subtle transitions or these plays within there to kind of pull out particular things. So that was my point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we got about 30 minutes left. We've got about 7 images, so we'll go. All right, Diane.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Honeybee. Miss
Yeah.
Honeybee.
I chased this poor bee all over the yard. And of all the shots I got, I like this one. I worked it. This is not worked except for the auto under the basic panel. And I was just wondering what you would do with it.
Yeah, so
If anything.
probably, well, good job working the bee. I don't think I've had the patience to work the bee quite yet as well. So I would probably start with some cropping on this one. So it could be a center point of focus. When I do center cropping, I just pulled up the R to pull up the center crop. We're looking for something that's a little bit more symmetrical. And what we have going on is a lot of kind of dead space on the right. And so then what I would do is kind of bring it into one of the focal points. So if we talk about the rule of thirds kind of focal points, we're going to create some movement. You can kind of go higher or lower, but maybe crop in potentially just a little bit on one of the sides. And then now we're making the bee feel a little more intimate as well. And then the radials and some of the other things I showed earlier to pull particular focus into the scene would help. So we could do, we'll just show on the brushing real quick, but you could brushing the bee with a brush. You're going to pull out some of the textures and the lines and kind of get the bee to pop a little bit. You could do a similar thing on some of the leads around. And what we're looking to do, what you should be looking to do is how to pull the bee out a little more. And then one of the other things that I like to do on some of the smaller scene ones, I'll do that radial on what I call blurring the background. So I'll do a radial on, and this is a way to create a little bit more depth of field. So now we have it around the bee and the flower. We want to keep that in focus because that's a nice focal point. And then we'll invert it and we'll blur everything else kind of outside it a little bit. And that's a little too aggressive, but it's a starting point. Now we can kind of start backing it off to taste, but now we're kind of going to back it off just a little bit. And so now subtly, we can kind of shape it around. We're bringing more of that focus onto the bee as well. And so this would be our before and our after. So we pulled in to the particular scene, made the bee more of a thing, and you could brighten the bee up or do some other things as well. Be my thoughts, but well done.
Thank you.
Okay, keep rolling, Suki.
I'll unmute myself. Thanks, Nick. To be honest, I haven't heard of you before. And when Sandy sent me the link, I checked your images and I thought, oh, maybe I should throw you a landscape image, which I took a few years ago. And this is at Alabama Hills. And I loved the, what do you call, the landscape there. And suddenly you walk, you hike around and you see this beautiful cactus. I don't know what brand or what breed or what type they are. This was the best one I could get in a bunch. The rest were one will be off, and so I just knelt down with my wide angle lens and shot this. I just wanted to. I wish the background was a little better. I wish it was a triangle, but the mountains behind, I forgot the names of those.
Yeah, it's Sierras.
Sierras, yeah. I wish something was that had a taller peak in the centers to just.
Well, if you Mount Whitney's right there, that's the highest peak in the lower 48. So.
I know. I want to climb that one day.
Yeah, well, come on back. I teach some classes over there. So. So what we have working here within the scene is we have the textures of the cacti, and it's a species of barrel cactus. I don't know the exact one. And then we have a bright, and then we have a dark, and then we have a darker, and then we have here. So we have a lot of opportunity for kind of those zonal transitions to bring out depth within the scene. So I'm going to show. This is going to be pretty quickly because we're kind of running close on time. So I'm going to do one on the cactus itself. I'm going to do the enhanced details, and it's going to sharpen the cactus. This is a compressed JPEG, so it's going to not look as good as something else. So now we've sharpened that cactus up a little bit, and then I would do one to just double click. I'm on the brush. I'm just going to zero it out, increase the exposure a little bit, and I'm going to paint. Just brush this middle portion that's already bright and kind of brighten it just a hair more, probably warm it a hair. And then I'll do a new brush and I'll take an exposure down just a little bit, cool it off a little bit because we like the transitions to warms to cool are going to create depth. And then just ever so slightly, you should all be pretty subtle. We're going to do this portion here and then I'll do another new brush. And I'll come down a little bit more on the coolness, come down a little bit more on the exposure, and I'll actually go negative on the dehaze. So I'm not trying to dehaze. I'm actually trying to haze this just a hair, and I'll paint back through this area. And so, so now I've brought in just a couple layers. And so if we look at the before and the after, and this is just as a quick demonstration, but we're creating those transition zones that are allowing the eye to kind of make some distance leaps within there. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Come on back. I'll be happy to have you.
Thanks.
All right. Mr. Don. If he's on.
Hello, I'm here.
All right. Anything you'd like to say about this one?
Well, just happened to be a sunset in the eastern sky one evening. I was watching the colors change for about an hour and hoping for a sailboat to come by.
Oh, couldn't get one to come. Sandy wouldn't come see you on her boat, huh?
No.
Oh, geez. Great. Well, so we have some repetition with the clouds, which is nice. We have some interaction, some good cool light within here. When we think about images like this, we're looking to minimize the areas where we're going to get drawn to from a really bright perspective. And so the tendency is going to be to go to this really bright cloud up here versus staying down where we have some of the interest and some of the other stuff potentially within the scene. The other thing about a scene like this is we have a decent amount of kind of almost dead space over on the right. So it kind of feels a little unbalanced. And so this one is one I would consider cropping down into, I like 16:9, more landscape kind of panorama crop sometimes. The other thing is maybe we can move up just a little bit and not have this dock down here. And so we're moving around, we're keeping those clouds. We can probably actually widen this just a little bit more. And don't be afraid to crop in on your scenes to kind of pull in what the particular area of interest. Looks like we could possibly lightly straighten out the horizon just a skosh as well. And so now we've pulled into the scene, and now we have the clouds. We don't have the bright spot up there. And then you could go through and make some different adjustments. We could start to darken up, bring a little more of that cloud detail back, take the lights down as well. Now we're bringing back some more of the clouds, taking the highlights down. I don't want to keep the highlights up because we're losing some color as well. And then you could take your highlights down. You can do these globally. We can do some of these locally and open our shadows a little. And by opening our shadows, then we can see some of the tree detail as well. So just playing around with some of the variations within that to bring out more of the color down here, more of the cloud detail, less of the focus. And this would be before and after just on those tweaks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Well, I'm going to keep rolling. Jim.
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. Anything you'd like to say about this one?
Not too much. I was trying to focus on the sunrise, obviously, and gather the elements, trying to frame it. So,
okay.
And the little highlight on the beach there, the little red spot. So,
okay. Well, I'm going to show different techniques. We're dealing with something similar with the really bright clouds up here. So that's one thing to consider, similar to what I just showed of if you wanted to possibly crop that a little bit. I don't know how much adjustments you've done, but definitely taking the highlights down is going to help a fair amount. So it's a little less bright. We're not losing a lot of the details. We could possibly even open the shadows back up just a hair and keep that. One of the things I would do or consider on a scene like this is we have kind of two areas of light. So one of the other ones I do sometimes is I do add a light source. And so it's just a little bit of warmth, a little bit of exposure, a little bit of clarity. And it's a radial, and I'll do it kind of starting where the light source is and kind of back down through into the scene. So we actually can extend it just a little bit more as well. And so what the intention of that is to tie in some of the light there. So we're tying in that portion of the light and kind of leading us into some of the warmth you would expect. What's that?
Connecting the dots.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, connecting the dots. And so you can do that wide variety of ways, but I always, in a scene like this in particular, because you already have light there, tying those in, bringing in some of the interest as well. So it's got a lot of really nice emotion in the scene. I like it.
That's what I like about it.
Nice. Great.
Thank you.
All right. We got 5 left and we got 18 minutes, give or take, plus time for questions. So we're going to move kind of quick. Scott.
All right. That's me. I took this in Death Valley a few years ago. I don't usually do landscapes. I left this mostly in acros, that monochrome filter, and I was going to revisit it. So I just thought I'd throw it out there and see what you saw.
Great. So the way I do on the black and whites, and I teach this, I just taught a black and white class, as I go into the profile browser. So over here, there's a little 4 square and you can pull up the profile browser. And then Lightroom has a bunch of different black and white presets that you can kind of scroll through just by highlighting them. And they're going to showcase kind of different parts and pieces of your black and whites. So as you go through, you're going to kind of get a sense of what things you're doing. So I'm wanting to see a little more contrast punch kind of coming out.
Yeah.
And so maybe something like that, and then possibly select. And I know it's already been converted, but now we're converting a little more. And then going through after we've done that, and then making some of the black and white mix adjustments. And so down here, this usually is HSL, but in when we get down into black and whites, then it turns to a mix. And I'm not good enough with my colors to be able to manually look at stuff oftentimes. And I'll go over here and I'll do the little adjustment. adjust black and whites, and I'll come through and I can click on brighter parts like the up here. And for some reason this hasn't been working lately for me. I don't know if it's because it was already converted to black and white or what's going on, but what is going on? It's not working right now. It's doing a little bit. It usually works. I think maybe because it's already converted once. Maybe why it hasn't worked the last 2 times I've tried to do it on somebody else's JPEGs, but you can drag in and do a lot of stuff there. So that will bring out a lot of those contrasts. Then you could do also some of those contrast adjustments, the global contrast, to bring out more of the contrast, and especially in a black and white. Then we could deal with things like the foreground here. We could do something like a radial here. And I don't want to add a light source, but I want to open up the shadows maybe down through this area. So opening those up, bringing some whites in as well. So we're kind of creating some of the transition portions to kind of move through. We got the road kind of going through. So these kind of things would be the ways I would approach this image. You could do some tone curving without doing the actual adjustments. If we just drag the middle portion, oftentimes we're going to pull out a lot of those tone curves. We're going to bring down some of those brights as well. So this would be kind of our before and after. And we just, with those steps, added a fair amount of more contrast into the scene.
Yeah, for some reason, when I originally took that, it was like noon or something, and it was, the desert is very bright, and for some reason I kind of liked it that way at first, but I know that's not typically what's done. Usually a little bit of contrast would improve it.
Yeah, no, the brights are good, but and then you're getting more into the high key images, which have a different thing. Sometimes if you like the brights, then be pushing them, be pushing things kind of the even more of that direction. So.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep. All right, Thomas.
I'm here.
I have a client of mine that has the exact same image we've worked on for printing. And I was like, wait a second, he's still Dick's image? So I believe it's Alaska, right?
No, it's Jasper National Park in Canada.
Maybe his is different then. I'm pretty sure his was Alaska. Maybe I'm just, that's nice. All right, anything in particular?
I've played with this somewhat, and I think I need to make the mountain a little, not quite, a little darker. I don't know. I just keep playing with it. And
oh, good. Those are the fun ones.
I really haven't, been satisfied where I've gotten.
All right. Well, let's take a look at a couple other tricks I use sometimes. One, I will sometimes do my blue calibration all the way up, and that does not look right. Was this an original JPEG or did you shoot it raw?
I shot a JPEG.
Okay. So what we have going on is we have a fair amount of blues when we look up here. And so if we warm it up just a hair, it's possibly going to help the white balance in it just a little bit, which will help some of that. So we're going to warm it up just a little bit, and then we're going to start by taking our highlights down. So then we're bringing more of that contrast, more of that definition into the mountain there, which I agree with your assessment on there. I'd like to see that a little bit darker. And then the same thing here, we're going to kind of shift highlights a little bit, bring the lights in a little bit as well, and then kind of take our darks down just a little bit more as well. So now we're kind of building on the light that's already there. The midtones really build on the light. It's there. We're creating some more kind of drama within there. And then if we've looked, let me look at the before and after. So we've warmed up the scene, and we've brought a lot more of the light into there. And then I probably would do similar things, bringing down adding some of the vignette. So vignetting it in to kind of bring in a little bit more as well. And then if there's other tweaks you want to make, adding some more light back into the sky or something, you could do that with grads. So you could go back in and you could do a grad up here. Oops. Just want to prove to you guys that I'm not what happened? I think I must have actually reset it. Sorry. There we go. So we'll do it. You could do a grad up here. if you needed to bring back anything. So sometimes come up into the grad portions up here. We don't want to add a light source. We just want to add a little, I'm going to add probably a little bit more warmth up into the sky as well. Maybe add some contrast to get a little bit of those details back in the clouds. Yeah, a little texture. So, and this would be kind of, oops, I don't want to delete this thing. I'm going to hit the right button. It's been a long day. Before and after. So by warming it and then bringing down highlights, bringing down the tone curve, vignetting, we've brought that focus into the center part.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else you want to add or?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Great. All right, Kay.
I'm here.
Hi, Kay.
Hi there.
Anything you'd like to add on this image?
Yeah.
Say?
I don't shoot scenery that often. Mostly it's more of a photojournalism approach. But this was New Year's Eve in Rocky Harbor, Newfoundland. And the cold just sort of penetrated everything that you were wearing. And it was wet. And I wanted a picture of the little town from that vantage point. And then the bird came in and it just made the picture for me.
Yeah, I can see why. I think it's a raven or maybe a crow. I can't tell, but well, that's great. These are the kind of scenes. One of the things I actually just the camera club eval I did for Pittsburgh a couple days ago. I was talking about vertiramas. So we talk about panoramas, but we don't talk that often about vertiramas. And this looks like a vertirama crop, which is a great choice because there could be, we want the focus to be on both of those. So there's a storytelling element that's already in place with the scene like this, which is great because you have obviously the coldness of the water. Feels cool. I can feel the coolness of the scene. Excuse me. The only tweaks I sometimes look at on images like this that are very have a lot of, I sometimes confuse them. I think it's high key versus low key. Is the tone curve portions. Sometimes we can pull out as we look at the histogram, we're pushed towards the highlights. So if we started to shift towards the darks just a little bit more, quite a bit, we're doing in this case, bringing those highlights down, moving more of the detail into the histogram, into the center part, and the lights down. Just I'm not liking what it's doing on the lights actually. And we can look just ever so slightly at the shadows. The shadows are really impacting those trees, so we're kind of bringing the trees down. If we look at a before and after, we've brought out just a little bit more dimensionality down within the scene down here. And so it's got a little more dimensionality in the trees, especially over here on the left, a little more darkness. So there's more transition portions. So that's one thing to consider. The other thing to possibly consider as we look at this histogram, since it's so bright, would be a global takedown of the highlights. And it's kind of flattening the scene out more than I think I would like. So I'd probably leave that up. But otherwise, I think it's a great storytelling. The birds has that movement from left to right, which we talked about, and a lot of good things.
And she's moving to flying into the town.
Yeah, exactly. There's some good storytelling. So well done.
Thank you.
All right, 2 left. And I can stick around a little after for questions that people have as well. Roger.
Hi, this was in Huangshan, China. It's we were climbing here, and I like the picture. I did a little work to darken the clouds, to dehaze a little bit the blue mountains to get some of the ridges in, but I'm not sure the composition is quite right. I thought maybe getting rid of some of the green by cropping upward, but I appreciate your thoughts on this photograph.
Yeah, so it's interesting when I look at it because we have so much there's so much depth back here within. There's just those gradation layers back within the mountains back here, which are really compelling. We can look at cropping. but I'm not sure it's actually going to help because the trees are kind of helping to hold us in. So if we crop in and then crop up, we've lost a little bit of that foreground and that kind of sense of scale.
Yeah, I see that.
So I don't think I would crop actually. But what I would want to do is look a little bit about the detail back here. And it's a challenging, I've had a couple clients that have gone there and I've looked at their images. It's a challenging place to photograph from what I can see. I mean, you like the great composition, but you didn't bring your rock climbing gear to get where you need to be kind of stuff. So you got to work with what you have. But I would work with some of the clouds back in here. And so one of the ones I use that I've built as well is called Haze Edition. Where did I go? Oh, yeah, Haze Edition right here. And I would do it something like this over the actual, just bear with me. So do something like this over the actual clouds out there or the trees. And then I'll go range mask it. And I will come in on this other side by holding down the Alt or Option key. And so we're going to range mask in and exclude some of and we're going to kind of adjust it. Sometimes I have to go both directions and look. I'm going to go this way now. See what it's doing. So I'm trying to exclude when I'm coming in on this range mask, the darker parts, and I don't know if it's working the way I want to right now. Yeah, it's adding that haze. So there's our before. This is our after. And so we're adding just a little bit more of that haze down in there. So more of the haze, more of the definition. And then we could actually begin to cool it off just a hair more. And so these are ways to work scenes like this. So that's our before and our after. So we're adding more definition back in here, more atmospheric, making it feel further away, kind of more endless as well. So you could work similar to what we did with Alabama Hills if you wanted to kind of work this scene out a little bit. You can minimize a little bit of what's in here. So one of the techniques on minimizing foreground versus cropping it out is just, I use the grad filter and I'll take down the exposure. Sorry, I got my thing right here. Take down the exposure, kind of start at something like that. It can be pretty aggressive. And then when we take down the exposure, we can take down the highlights, the shadows as well. So maybe doing something like that will minimize the vegetation without getting rid of it and kind of push. So we're trying to kind of lightly nudge, and maybe even in that regard, I do duplicate it and come over here and do the same thing. Just kind of, which is a handmade vignette if you want to think of it as such. So we're helping to kind of hold the eye and push it back into the scene to encourage it to explore.
I like that.
Yeah, it's great. All right, one last one and then time for questions.
Good.
Oh, Angela.
So this is taken a number of weeks ago, just as breeding season was started. It was early morning, but I was challenged by the light because this actual location was in a little bit of a valley in between houses on both sides. So I was obviously trying to avoid the houses, but they were very nestled into pine trees. So again, trying to find the light right, correct lighting, and then highlighting them where they were exposed as best as possible. So your thought?
Yeah. Great shape and form. Like, I mean, you obviously can't control the shapes of their necks, but there's a lot of interesting movement you captured there. You framed the scene very well. You kept enough of the top portion of this feather to have that movement within the scene, which I like as well. So that's a nice use as well. And having some of the sense of scale is nice. Actually, the vegetation here kind of adds to what are they doing? They're nest building, you kind of have some elements there. So there's a lot really going well. I can understand what you're talking about with challenging light, but it's good. So one of the things I can also look at, it didn't work on the other. These are JPEGs, but sometimes when we take our blue blue calibration up, it'll bring out a little bit more richness in the light. And what that's doing is increasing the blue pixels, not increasing the saturation of all pixels. And it's increasing just the pixels that have a little bit of blue in them. So sometimes this will bring out more of that golden light. It's not working where, I don't know if it's the JPEG or whatever, it's not working the way I wanted. The other tweak you could make within Photoshop is you could also do a luminosity masking that targets just the brights and to darken up the backs a little if you wanted to darken up the lighting on the left or anything. I'm going to show the poor man's version of this right now. And the poor man's version, we're going to do a radial. Let me see, we're going to do a grad and we're going to do the range masking one more time. And we're going to adjust it to just target those bright portions in the back. So it's a really constricted mask. And then we'll take down the highlights. We'll take down the exposure, kind of back through there, maybe take the whites down. This is a JPEG versus your RAW. It'll look better on your RAW. But doing that just darkens what's behind. We'd actually could, I'm going to redo this. I'm going to do one more thing on it. So what we're doing is darkening any focus back here as best we can. We could actually probably warm up the whole background ever so slightly. And you can see just doing that, it's just going to keep more of the focus onto the birds. And then the brushing techniques related to details. You could brush through these portions. So where'd it go? Enhanced details. So brushing just these portions right here of the feathers in the neck. This is a little too dramatic for this JPEG. But on your raw, when you do this, it wouldn't look as dramatic. And even if it does, then you can tone it back and bring that portion out as well. So now you're kind of building a little bit of that light that's there, but also using it to bring out more separation. So this is before and after.
I like that. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're at time, but I also have time for questions, either related to the presentation or any of the things here or other stuff in general. So hopefully this has been
nice job.
Good. So thank you.
Clarifying question. When you say work on the raw, so normally I use Photoshop. So I normally use Adobe Camera Raw and I put it into Photoshop and work on that. But with Lightroom, are you say like, do you actually work on the raw? Like you don't convert it to anything?
Yeah, I actually working on so Canon CRW, I can't remember what Nikon is. I mean, I can't remember what Sony is. I think it's ARW, and then Nikon's NEF. So that format file is what I'm actually working on. So yeah, if you're working in Adobe Camera Raw, that's actually on the raw. Lightroom, same thing. So
well, that's okay. Yeah, I normally just boot it right out. Yeah, well, that's interesting. Okay,
exactly. So
thank you. That was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've mastered Lightroom in ways I've never seen before. I have a lot to learn.
Well, good. Well, maybe you'll join me next Wednesday or catch the recording. I'm going to teach these techniques in a little more detail on raw files, my own raw files. You'll get a copy of the raw files to work on if you want to, but you obviously can use them on your own. But it makes the JPEGs, you can oftentimes make some changes, but the raws, woo, it can be really, really dramatic. So
just go to your website for that.
Yeah, it's on my website.
Hey, Nick, you did some luminosity masking and range masking. What's the distinct advantage of doing that? In my experience, it's been managing halo or diminishing halo effects. Is that the only advantage, or what's the other advantages?
The biggest advantage, so luminosity masking in Photoshop using the Tony Kuiper panels. The biggest one is you can select what particular things you want to target. I use it primarily just for lights and darks, dodging and burning, but you can use it to target specific color bands. You can use it to target specific color channels to be able to increase or decrease those kind of things. But if all you use it for is dodging and burning, so brightening or darkening particular parts, there's less and more restrictive masks. So you can get less and less restrictive or more and more restrictive as you go through. So that's the benefit I find. I don't actually personally use it for haloing. Maybe I should.
Yeah,
Maybe I
thank
should.
you.
So yeah, great question.
Hi, Nick. Thanks. I enjoyed your presentation, and your portfolio looks great. This is Suku, by the way. And just a question about, I'm looking at the images behind you, and I was wondering whether they are metal prints or acrylic, and do you have one preference, one over the other?
Yeah. So this one right there, where my thumb's pointing, is a Lumichrome. So it's a piece. It's the Lumichrome's a special process from Nevada Art Printers, and it goes in between two pieces of acrylic. And then almost the rest of it, so for the frame prints, are metal. So I use either Bay Photo or McKenna for my metal prints, and I love metal. It's my preference. Clients love it. Because you don't have to big frame prints. You don't have to, with a metal print, you can just put a small nail in the wall. You don't have to find a stud and do everything else. And then the durability and everything else. So I talk about it. One of my tutorials on my website is preparing your images for print. It's a $50 tutorial, but it comes with $80 worth of print credits from McKenna. So it's actually, you basically get paid, and you get my print workflow and everything else. And I talk decent amount about all the different printing materials. So I printed on everything from wood to acrylic to canvas, and what I like. But my preference currently, pretty strongly, is metal for a wide variety of reasons.
Okay, thank you.
Great question.
Any other question? Okay. I guess not. And we're right on time. Thank you, Nick.
Yes, my pleasure.
Oh my goodness. It was, so interesting. I learned a lot, and I really appreciated the image review. And I learned a lot from that.
Well, good. Yeah, it's
I'm motivated to get to some of my images.
just at the time we're getting into summer months to go get more, right? So good to hear.
Okay.
Well, perfect. Well, I appreciate spending time with you all. I dropped my email, my website. I think Sandy will probably send out is stoverphoto.com. Feel free to reach out. Love to hear from you. Any feedback as well. And otherwise, I'm going to go figure out some dinner.
All right.
Very good.
Thanks so much. That was awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you so much, Nick. Seriously.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. I'm going to close it down now.